All right, I just started the recording, so I think we're going to get started here momentarily. Before I get started, I'll open it up to anybody from DOR if you want to jump on first.
Yes, thanks, Dave. This is Wendy. Thanks everyone for jumping on. So this is going to, just be one of two training sessions. They're going to be the same training sessions. So if you're on today, you don't need to do the other one unless you want to. I mean, more power to you if you want to. Um, but this is because e-file is going to be, the electronic filing is the only way we are going to be officially approving levies this year. Now, with that being said, if you want to send us any paperwork like the old way for our, just for your own comfort, we'll take it. Maybe if there's a question that comes up, we might review it or something like that. But I want to be very specific that if you send us only paper and do not do e-file, you will not get levy approval this year. And so it is very imperative that if you are still struggling with last year's stuff, you need to figure it out. We need to figure out how to move forward because, this is it. There's no more. That last year was our chance to work out all the bugs for each individual county, and if it wasn't, you weren't able to take advantage of that for whatever reason, then we're kind of playing with fire this next year, but we're gonna have to move forward. With that also being said, that just because we used last year as our first year to work out bugs doesn't mean it's still going to be perfect. Um, there could be multiple things. One, you might get an error because your data is wrong. There's something in there that's not matching. There could be something where it's something on a vendor side, meaning there's something that there's a translation table or something that's not matching up, or it could be something that the axiomatic system, it's something that we didn't catch last year that we're going to try to correct. So if you get an error, the first thing you should do is check to see, is it me? You know what I mean? Do your due diligence. And if that doesn't work, or if you still can't figure it out, then reach out to Melissa or Brianna. Melissa's been the head person, but we're slowly bringing Brianna into some of this so that she can be of assistance as well. Reach out to one of them, say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. Can you help me? And then we will kind of go through the channels. And then you can also always reach out to support at Axiomatic if you want to as well, if you think it's something on their end. But just know that Melissa and Brianna are definitely, we're here to help try to smooth out some of those things. And then, sorry, I had to take a drink there. Also, the email that I sent last week, that there are going to be some changes with the raise amount versus the request amount. And David might touch on this later in the presentation. So if he does, you don't have to respond now. But I was a little bit trigger happy on that because it is going to happen. But we were waiting to try to finalize some of those stragglers with the 2022. And so he had not pushed that forward through to production, meaning to the main server, to the actual site. So, because we were thinking still have a little bit of time, but some of you are awesome and getting yourself in already. So if you followed my email from last week and are getting errors now, don't worry. We, as I mentioned, Catalyst slash Axiomatic is correcting that, and so by the time November 1 comes around or sooner, that will be in place. So, oh, look at that! That change went into place last night. Fantastic. So I'm going to get off my little soapbox here. I just, I really can't stress the importance of this isn't, this is how we're going forward. And so can't stress that enough. So I just really, really want to harp on, we need to make sure everyone's using this and getting comfortable. I know that it's something different and it's change, and that's always scary. It's been the same way for us here at Department of Revenue as well. We're still figuring things out, but we will get through, and yeah, it will become a better thing, and it will become second nature. And for those of you that are newer auditors that don't know the old way, you won't even know why we're making a big deal out of this. So without further ado, I will turn it over to David so that he can go through his stuff.
All right, thanks, Wendy. My name is Dave Salzer, and many of you probably know me throughout the project. So today we're going to be talking about levy training, or the levy process. Tried to go through and clean up the slides from last year and focus them on, more of the information I think people need to know now that you're familiar with how the system works, for most of you. So as far as today goes, I'm going to give a presentation. We'll cover some of the basics. We'll talk about the levy form group. We'll talk about uploading, and then I'll do a software demonstration, and take any questions you have along the way. You can feel free to enter your questions in the chat. I am watching it, so I will try to stop as I'm going through and answer questions as they come in. So the basics, the e-file application is designed to capture and validate information coming in from the counties to the state. One of the big changes with the way that system works is that it has shifted the review of the information to prior to you actually sending it into the state. So it used to work that you would fill out your information, send it to state, they would do a bunch of checks and reviews, and then you'd hear back. The big change is that the system is doing all of those checks and validations when you attempt to submit it. So for many of you, you've run into issues that have been, consistent through the years, but now that we've moved into electronic filing, the state has, asked you to update and correct. So to Wendy's point, we tried to work out most of the bugs last year with the various counties. We have a few who we're still trying to get on the right page, but we'll get there. So essentially all of the different form groups within the application work the same way. And a form group or a filing is just a group of forms that get submitted together. So in the case of the levy forms, it's the 73, 73S, and 74 that make together the form group or the filing. And you're able to complete each of those filings or tasks in whatever order you like. You can complete your 74, then your 73, it doesn't matter. Essentially, you mark all of your individual forms complete, and once that is done, you do your certification task. When you do your certification, it first checks across the forms. So it makes sure that your 73 matches your 74 and vice versa. And that is the final step that will allow you to submit your information off to the department for their review. So this is no different than you've gone through in previous filing groups or last year, same workflow. This is just an example of the home screen when you log in, what it looks like. You're able to see all your different form groups. You'll have your county and your tax year. Of course, we're going to be talking about the levy form group, which is due on the 1st of November. Every form group gives you the ability to file an extension. When you go to the form group itself, you'll see a blue extension button in the upper left-hand corner. If you click on it, you'll be brought down to the extension screen where you'll be asked to enter an extension date and a reason, and then you can submit that off to the state for review. So I didn't want to belabor the background on e-file because I want to focus on the actual material about the levy forms. So really what we're here to talk about are the 73/75, 73S, and 74. So as we talked about, when you complete each of the individual forms, it will run checks to make sure that the form is correct. And then when you attempt to certify the form group, it will run cross checks to make sure that all of the forms within the group align with each other. So the first form, the PT 7375. This form is a tax request form. The purpose of the form is to capture the amount you're trying to raise in taxes and the tax rate for each district. So the form is really there to capture how much you're asking for and what the resulting rate is for each of your respective districts. The 7375 captures everything except for schools. Schools are captured on their own separate form. what the state uses this form for is to validate that your tax rates are being calculated correctly. And when we get to the validation screen, we'll talk about how that's done. But this is the basic concept of the form. It's just to capture that tax request. So if we look at this example, you can see we have a request and a raise and a rate. So we have 3 different values that are being captured for this respective district by fund type. Last year, there was a lot of discussion about what's the difference between a request and a raise. And this was the focal point of Wendy's email last week. Essentially, the difference between the request and the raise is really a function of rounding based on your tax rate. So ultimately, the last year what we were doing was using your request amount as a validation field. This year we'll be using your raise amount as the validation field. And I'll be stepping through that validation in a few slides and talk about exactly what's done. But essentially, the purpose of this form is to understand how much you're raising in taxes and what the associated tax rate is with that by district and their respective fund types.
And in addition to that, actually, if you want to go back to that screen, David. So David's 100% right, but also the reason why I switched it, as I tried to mention in the email last week, is that for our purposes, we run into some unique situations with overlapping districts or those opt-outs that are, the people, the way they actually request the amount is goofy. And so sometimes it's just good to see what did they truly request versus what are you putting on the tax bill. It helps us do our checks on our end to make sure that everything's in line here at the Department of Revenue. And so that's why I chose to make that change, is that I'd like to see that if Dewey County General really actually requested $1 million, but the auditor recognized, hey, I can't give them $1 million. They can only get 879, 879,000 in their general fund. That's what I'm going to give them. So that is why I made that change, is I would like to see what did they actually request versus what are you going to put on the tax bill. And then in relation to that tax rate is what you're actually going to be putting on the tax bill, which is that raised amount.
Okay, next up is the PT 73S. And the 73S is the tax request, but for school districts only. One of the things that caused some confusion last year with this form in particular is that specific tax rates for school districts are tiered based on the classification code. So, for example, owner occupied pays a different tax rate than agricultural property. And the form is actually asking you for either a requested amount or a requested rate. And that is only for the agricultural rate. The system automatically will calculate the tiered tax rates based on that. So it's probably easier to explain it showing the actual screen itself. But you see this example, I use Dewey, and you'll see Dewey again in the demo today, just because they had an auditor's growth form on our test site. Essentially, we're looking at Dupree School District. You see they have a general fund, a capital outlay, and a special ed fund. We know that the general fund is actually 3 different rates, because depending on what your classification code is, you get a different tax rate for your school district. Because that's a known multiplier that we carry in the database, all we're asking for here under this general line is the agricultural rate. If you're entering a request, it should be the full request amount. But for the rate, it would be only your ag rate. And you'll see if you run a report, it'll show you all the other rates. It's just multiplying them times the factor that we store in the database. So we say, well, an owner occupied rate is, whatever, 1.5 times an ag rate. So that's just something to note, because I know a lot of people got caught on that last year, and we probably didn't do the best job explaining it in training as well. Anything you want to add on that one, Wendy?
No. I don't think so anyway.
So the final form in the group is the 74. And the 74 is really just the ability to capture all of the unique combinations of levies that you have. So every county has, at least 3 or 4 combinations of levies. So certain areas that are in one school district or another, or some ones that has an ambulance district and other parcels don't. So the 74 is a reporting of all of those unique combinations and their respective valuation base. So the value that goes with those different combinations of rates. This form is used to basically confirm that you are applying your tax rates appropriately to the various combinations that you have. And the 74 looks at a lot of other data ultimately to make sure that it's correct. The form itself is very large and unappealing. Obviously, we anticipate most of you are uploading this form, but essentially it is capturing by entity, and that term taxing entity is just a term we use to represent a unique combination of levies. So in this case, this taxing entity has the Dewey County levies, Timberlake City, Timberlake School. I see some questions coming in. I'm going to grab those in 1 second. Additionally, we're looking at all the respective funds within those districts and then a breakdown of their rate. One thing that's important to note on the 74 is the valuation information is very repetitive. The values for all of your records within an entity should be the same, because you're really just telling us of the aggregated information about some subset of parcels within the county. So this is, Timberlake City, Timberlake School District, and these are their combination of levies. And this is the value that that area of the county represents. All right, before we go into completion checks, I'm going to step back and look at the questions. So Brenda asked, if there is a taxing entity's max request is $100,000 and they request $100,000, both amounts and request and raise would be the same. Yes, that is correct. What Wendy was indicating before, I believe, Brenda, is that some people ask for more than they're allowed frequently in the request.
Or sometimes they ask for less too. So then that way we can say, hey, Deadwood is only asking for 80,000, but they can legally get 100,000. Is that right? Is that really what they want to do? And then that way you can go back and verify with the city that, that's, I saw that too. And I did double check and they want to reduce their levy or their request or whatever the case may be.
Okay. So this is Brenda. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding it correctly. So in the request amount, we're supposed to put the request that the city of Deadwood said they want $100,000. Or am I supposed to put the max tax request that they could actually get 120, but I can only give her, okay, so.
Yeah, you were putting in what they requested. It's truly what they requested.
So yeah, there's no. Okay.
Yep.
And then if that's their max tax request, according to growth and CPI, what my tax system is going to raise is 100,000.
Correct.
That's what I put it. So I just put the same, unless it's different. Like for instance, with the opt-outs, when you increase their general fund, so they can request more growth and CPI next year.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Sorry for overthinking that, but I just want to make sure I was on the same path. Thank you.
Okay. And actually, before we jump to the school district one, let's jump down to Maryland on the overlapping districts, just because it's on the same screen.
Sure.
So on overlapping districts, you put the entire amount for both counties. You would put the entire amount in the request. So Custer County and Pennington County would put whatever that fire district requested they would both be putting the same number in the request box. But then Custer County, you would only put in the amount that you are raising in your. So looking at these numbers here, we'll just pretend that the request from the fire district was 879,000, but Custer County might only be raising $200,000 of that. You, Custer County, would put 200,000 there, and well, shit, that's not going to work, is it?
No, it should be it always has to be the fold out.
Yep. Well, god damn it. See, this is like, yeah, it was working just fine. Request raise. All right. No, that will work. Yes, that will work. Sorry. Yes, that'll still work, David. Because, okay, no, that also works. Sorry. I have been out for a day and a half and I'm not feeling well. And so, yeah, my brain's not working. You would put the full request of the district in the request box of the overlapping districts. Both Pennington and Custer would have the same number. If Custer is only raising $200,000 of that, it's going to only take Custer County's values, and therefore the raise and the rate will correspond together. So we'll be fine.
Okay. Do you want to go
yeah,
to the
it
school
should
question?
work if you're not pulling from the request box. So yes, you're right. You're right, Marilyn. See, look, you're even correcting me there. But yes, so it works out fine. So then going on to the school district levies ones. Both Kathy and Julie have some school district.
Do you want capital outlay levy in the request for the amount or in levy request? I think
So
they're asking, do you want an amount or a rate?
You always, capital outlay requires a dollar amount. And so, I mean, obviously you're going to report both, but the school district has to report it in a dollar amount. They cannot request a dollar, 49.50 for their levy. They have to say, I want $350,000 or whatever their amount is. So you would put in whatever in this box, either whatever they requested or whatever is you have to cut them down to. Now, this is a unique situation because there's the two different speed limits, if you want to correct that. There is, or say it that way. So a school district will ask for what they want. You have to check that against the spreadsheet that I sent out that says this is the maximum that they can get. So if what they requested is more than what is on that worksheet, you cannot give them what they requested. The maximum by law is what is on my worksheet. Then in addition to that, you would calculate what the levy is based off of the maximum. And if that levy is more than $3 per thousand, you will have to cut them back further because the max that they can get for their rate is $3 per thousand by law. There are two different limitations that the law it requires. There's the actual calculated dollar amount limitation and then a $3 levy limit. So you might need to do some finagling to figure out, okay, what is the dollar amount that a $3 levy is going to produce. I don't know how, I know there's several of you out there that have school districts that reach that maximum amount, but most, knock on wood, should fall under that $3 limit. And you only have to worry about the maximum that's on that worksheet that I sent out. And then on the school levy, do we need to somewhere to tell you that we have an added abatement levy? I do
The
believe
abatements
that
are
is
going in today. I was working on that right before this. So every school district that doesn't have an abatement levy will have one available to them.
So yeah, I was just going to say, because yeah, that was another change is that we are going, rather than you having to tell us, hey, Dupree has a TAD levy this year, and then maybe next year they don't and whatever, we're just going to put in default that there is the general TAD levies, and a special ed TAD levies. Now, again, what is a TAD levy? That's a new nomenclature that we started to use with this process. That's that additional levy that we calculate for any local TIFs, any abatements that you may have had, and any discretionary formula that is above what the law allows for a base level. So that's the TAD, TIF abatement discretionary. So we, as David said, we are building those in. So it will be default that they will show up and we'll have zeros. And if you end up having that in your school district, then you will need to then change those zeros to whatever the numbers are. And then Julie's going back to so I have put the maximum by law on the request and or rate. Okay, so on the PT 73, you have a request box and a raise box. On the PT 73S, you do not have the two boxes. You only have what they are going to be able to get. So there is a differential there. So the rules for one form is not going to match the rules for the other form just because they are different forms.
Thank you, Wendy. I appreciate that. That was the one major question I had, because I've got a school and they practically exceed their capital outlay request double what they could get. So yeah, so I just want to make sure when on that PT 73S that I will put in the rate that you have sent us, that's their maximum allowable, and then of course it doesn't equal the 3 mils, but
perfect.
I want to make sure.
Okay, that's a great question. Yep.
Thanks.
All right, we ready to jump into the certification checks? So as we talked about, there are 2 levels of checks. When you complete each form, it does a round of checks just to make sure the form itself is correct. And then when you do the certification task, it does a cross-form check. So that's the only point where we can be sure that all the other forms are done and go across all of them, make sure the information aligns. So the first cross-check is the PT 7375, or excuse me, completion check. So when you click the complete button on a PT 7375, the system goes in and actually calculates your tax rate on its own independently. It takes your raise amount. It used to be the request. Now this year it's the raise. And it goes out to your auditor's growth form that you filed for that respective district and calculates a tax rate. It then compares your tax rate that you enter to the one it calculates to basically say, did you enter the tax rate based on the raise amount that you're indicating and what your auditor's growth form that you certified to the state is. If you fail this check, and I want to make this general comment, since you went in and filed these forms last year, we overhauled all of the error messages, and that's part of when it went out in the build last night, to be as explanatory as possible. So I encourage you, when you run into an error message, to read it on the forms, specifically these completion messages, because we tried to make sure they were as clear as they could be. So, sorry, let me go back there. So the error message will say the tax rate you entered for this specific district and this fund of this amount is not equal to what the system calculated. So it's going to tell you what you entered and what the system calculated. And it's further going to say the rate that was calculated was done by dividing this amount by what's in your auditor's growth form. So we try to be as clear as possible to say, this is how we calculate your tax rate check, and this is the value we've calculated. Last year, it was more cryptic, and it showed you a number we calculated against yours. It wasn't particularly clear how to deal with it. So this is what that error message would look like on the form in real time. You would see this red item running across the top of the screen. If you had multiple forms that failed, you'd see, message after message after message. But the important thing is, if you receive this error, what should you do? You should read the error message very carefully and look for what district and which fund, because the message is going to point you directly to the problem districts. What you then want to do is look at that CY value from your auditor's growth form and verify it against the amount you've entered in the PT3 or PT 7375. I see someone saying in the chat, I'm off $4 in my total value compared to my growth forms. Is that going to be a problem this year? It depends on what form. We've changed the forms to have a little bit of an allowable, variation by, a few dollars here and there or a few percentage points. So,
yeah, I don't think, Kathy, on the growth form, I don't believe that'll be an issue. That is something that we would recognize, and yeah, but you should not have an error that pops up on that. If I am wrong on that, please let me know. But that should not be an issue on the growth form. I believe that we have, like David said, a workaround for that type of slight rounding issues.
So I would say the biggest thing that I noticed with these forms last year when people ran into problems, it was because you uploaded a file and perhaps it only populated a rate and not a request and raise, or just a request and not a rate. And so when the system would go through and try to calculate a comparable tax rate, it would get something different. So with the 7375, pretty much if you have values within the district and they're not matching, verify that calculation. And this goes for any form. If you see a fully blank district, that's something to email the help desk, because many of your vendors comply or do not comply with the coding system. So we have to run all the files through a translation. So that can result in files not loading. Particularly the hallmark of that is you have specific districts where all of your funds are blank. If that is usually how you can tell there's a translation problem. You may have almost every district loaded, but you have one or two with no information.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. So in that screen there, now it specifically says Timber Lake has some sort of issue. But even if you are only seeing the Timber Lake, or even if you don't get an error, I highly recommend that you go through each one of those tabs. So obviously the county tab is the one that is the default to show up, but go through your city and check to see that all of your cities are having some sort of information populated. Now, I do recognize that that's much easier for a Dewey County or a Harding County or a Stanley County, where you have very few cities, maybe very few organized townships, if any, and maybe one school district, something along that line. So, you know what I mean? So that's easy to do. But, and I don't know if you're going to touch on this at all, Dave, but you can run this over on where it says the upload buttons that are in gray. Right next to that, there's the reports button. You can run a PDF report that might, or you can also run a Excel document that will kick out your information in a better viewing format than per se going through each one of the tabs and clicking on the drop down box. But just do a quick scan, double check your information, just because it's no different than when you send us stuff. We always ask, hey, double check, make sure that what you're sending us is right. Because yes, the computer system will do the high level checks, but sometimes what we ran into with the growth was that there was no value in a water district. So then we'd have to go back and change things with the DOE side and stuff like that. Not saying that will happen always with the levy stuff, but it never hurts for you to just become comfortable with your data, and hey, is what it's reporting, is what it's sending to, oh my god, I cannot talk, to the DOR actually correct, or is it just something that, oh, I pushed a button in my computer and that's it? Always double check, get familiar with it, understand what it's trying to tell you, both in your system and in this system, is all I'm requesting. But it doesn't hurt to double check. And by running those reports and seeing and making sure that there is something in every single box that is supposed to have one.
Yeah, I would recommend always running a report rather than going tab by tab, because the reports will very easily let you scan all the information.
Just one other little thing to harp on that is, if you put in zeros in everything, more than likely it's probably going to complete, because if you have 0 request and he's 0 levy, the system isn't going to recognize that that's not right. So that's why it's so important.
So the next up is the 73S. The completion check there is against your allowable limits. So essentially the system is looking at the requested rate and making sure that it doesn't exceed. In the event you get an error message, it will say the tax rate entered for this amount for this fund in this district cannot exceed this amount. The place this came up last year was for people on their school general funds, where they were including the TIF abatement and discretionary, like fractional recaptures, for lack of a better term, in their general fund, and that was causing an error. So obviously we've captured new funds to correct that. If you do run into this error, just like all of them, it will display at the top of the screen. What do you do if you get it? Read the error message once again, and then look at what fund it is and what the allowable limit is for the year, and make sure that you're calculating that correctly. Like I said, the number one area this came up was with what we call TAD funds being lumped into the general or special education lines. The PT-74 does 2 checks when you attempt to complete it. The first one is verifying the value within the form. So essentially, excuse me, for each entity, the system takes the county general fund and looks at the information for value ag, value owner occupied, mobile, etc. And it sums that information, because the sum of all of those records should equal the total value of the county. So it compares that sum of the county general fund from each entity to your auditor's growth form. So it looks out at the auditor's growth and it says, is the total value of the county accounted for? And if you're below or above that amount, it will throw an error and say that you have an issue. The error message itself will indicate the type of value. So you can see here it says the agricultural values on the 74 do not equal the values on the auditor's growth form. The sum of the ag values from all of your entities' county general funds is this amount, and the amount from your auditor's growth fund is that amount. The system does the same check except using school general funds, because just like with your county general fund, the sum of the school general funds from all of your entities should equal the value of the county. The error message is identical, except it indicates school very clearly. If you receive this error, more likely than not, you're going to see a lot of them together. You're going to see ag, owner occupied, mobile, and it's going to spit out, like this case, all of the county and all the school came up as an error. Typically, that's because I have an entity that's not there. It's either didn't translate correctly, it's not correctly entered in the file you're uploading, whatever it may be. But if you're missing an entity, it will throw off all those values and report an error to you. So if you get this error, what do? The number one cause of this are translation issues in PT-74 files. So just like Wendy talked about before, I would go into the interface, I would go to the reports button and run either the PDF or Excel report, whatever one you're more comfortable in, and look for any empty districts and entities. If you see those, that's 99% of the time, or maybe I'm over exaggerating that. 90% of the time, that's the problem. The other 10% of the time, it's related to TIF districts. And I guess maybe I'm overstating percentages again, because the other thing that does cause issues on 74s, which Wendy has, I believe, eradicated, are unorganized areas being cut up due to colloquial boundaries. So unorganized areas of the county that are essentially being broken down into subsets for no levy-based reason. And so that was something I know the last year we went through, and Wendy had a lot of counties correct that. But like I said, it's almost always translation related. And if that's the case, you want to run the report and look and see, do I see any blank districts or entities? Certification cross checks happen on the certification form itself. Essentially, three things are checked. Are the three forms that have to be completed actually completed? Do the tax rates that you've entered for the various entities, districts, and funds on the 74 match what you put on the PT 7375? And do the tax rates that you've provided for the school districts match what's on the PT 73S? So basically, this is the point where the forms go back and forth and validate each other. If you have a failure for some reason on the screen, it's going to indicate it to you right there. You know, for example, it's saying fail on the form completion, and it's saying my PT 74 is not complete. It's also saying I'm failing on a tax rate check, that I have a rate of 288.36, and on my PT 74, I have a 0. So this will tell me if I have any additional problems that didn't get caught in the individual form completions. So we talked about this, all forms complete, that's pretty straightforward. This is what you'd see in a certification cross-check if you had a failed fund. Once again, pretty straightforward. Like I said, we've tried to make the error messages as readable as possible. I just want to make sure I know we're getting short on time. So I want to cover file upload and have a few minutes to just jump into the software and walk you through some things. So all of the files, the 73, 75, 73S, and the 74, all are intended to be uploaded. Most, if not all, of your vendors now produce the correct files with an asterisk. Some have content issues, but at least most vendors are able to produce the right structure of the files. And those files are uploaded directly into the application. When you upload a file, what it will do is populate the form for you automatically. You'll still need to go in and hit the completion button and have all the validation checked when you want to complete the process. Forms run on a 5-minute upload loop. So rather than making you all line up in single file when you upload files, the loop allows us to grab everyone and process in bulk at once. So essentially, at offsetting minutes throughout that 5-minute sequence, different uploads fire. Essentially, you have your 73, 75, 73S, and 74. You can go in and upload them all to their respective forms, log out, come back in 10 minutes later if you want, and they'll just process. You don't need to sit there and wait for them. If you have a problem with your upload, it will produce an error message on the top of the screen. Some of the year one challenges, I'm just going to hit on all these quickly before I jump into the demo. Districts, entity, and fund identification. We're still finding out about new districts and entities that we're trying to clean up. We're going through those right now. If you have new ones that you don't see in the system, let us know. Translation issues, as we talked about. So sometimes the vendors don't give us the numbering the way we expect it, so we have to translate it. And that can cause issues sometimes with your data uploads. I talked about consolidation of unorganized areas. I think we covered the TAD funds sufficiently. And we talked about error messages. So I'm going to jump into the demo here unless, Wendy, you have anything else you want to add in this moment.
Nope. Go forth.
Just my screen. So I'm going to log in. I will go to Dewey. So when you guys log in, it'll look a lot like this probably. You'll see your valuation certification submitted. You will see your auditor's growth submitted. I'm going to go into levy verification. I can zoom in a little bit as well. Here within the form group, you can see our different types of forms, our certification, our extension button. If I go into my 7375, you'll see I have data here. And so Wendy was talking about before your ability to navigate these different tabs, and you can select different districts within your tabs. So if you're in a larger district or a county, excuse me, that can obviously take a while if you're trying to go through one by one. So it's generally recommended that you would go here and go to the reports and either run a PDF or Excel report. And that will allow you to see the summary data very quickly. One of the things I want to note for the 7375, there are two different uploads, depending. This is kind of, a historic remnant we brought over. If you want to upload your file, you just simply hit the upload button, browse for your file, and select upload. I'll grab a file in a minute and I'll show you the banners that pop up on the screen. But pretty much just like Wendy talked about, the system is going to check your raise against your the auditor's growth form and produce a tax rate to compare it against what you entered. When I attempt to complete a form, it's going to do that validation check, and anything that doesn't pass is going to give me an error message here. So it's telling me that I have an issue with Timberlake, so I could go over to Timberlake and address that issue accordingly.
So there was a question, I don't know if you saw it, David, that do the reports
no, I have my thing minimized, so let me pop it up.
That's okay. Do the reports that we generate have to be submitted to Axio for approval before we can move forward with loading?
No, that's only if you had problems last year. Everyone had to do it last year so we could put in all these funds and entities for you. But I think there are only 2 counties that still have outstanding fund entity issues.
Correct. Yep, perfect. So yeah, this year you should just be able to upload and, go on your business and not have any issues. So thanks for answering that, David and Lane.
So 73, 75, pretty straightforward like we talked about. It's really just to capture that tax request and rate. 73S, same thing, looks just like we saw before on the screen. You can see I was making those screenshots for the meeting, so you can see I put in a tax rate of $9. So when I do that, and I attempt to hit complete, it's going to tell me that that is exceeding my allowable limit. Excuse me. The 74 is the one where you're really, not going to want to look through or hand enter data. Excuse me. Like I said, most of you are going to just go right to that upload button. But the important thing to note is once your file uploads, going through and running a report like Wendy said and making sure that everything works, because when you hit the complete button, it's going to run and do those validation checks we talked about. But in this case, a lot of people hit this error and they say, well, I don't know what to do next. And really the key is I would run an Excel report and I would immediately look just for what districts had zeros for all the values. Pretty straightforward process overall. So let me grab a folder here on my computer quickly with some uploads, and I can just show you what that process looks like. All right, so let's say I wanted to upload this information for Dewey. I didn't have values in the form, or I was unhappy with my values. I could start by going here. I could either browse or just drag and drop right in, hit upload. It's now going to tell me that that's in process. This banner will go away when the file uploads successfully. If it has an error, this banner will remain and it will say the file had an error. Notice that the button went away because it's in process, but I can upload a 75 right now as well and queue that up. I can also go out, upload my 74, and I could upload my 73S. So this is what I would do if I were in your shoes. I would just go upload everything and give it 5 minutes or so. You come back in and then look and try to go through each of your forms, run the report, make sure all the data is populated, see how it looks. It will take a minute or two to upload, as we talked about. It's on that loop. And the message will persist as long as it's in process. So if it hasn't uploaded yet, you'll continue to see that message. Once it successfully processes, the message will go away. You'll see data in the form and the button will reappear essentially. So that would be the way I would approach this, is just start by uploading all your files at once. Give it a few minutes to upload and then go through and make sure all the data populates correctly. Obviously, if you attempt to complete and you don't have data in the form or you have issues, it'll stop you and let you know as you're going through that. Once you've completed all your individual forms, you'll obviously go to that certification cross-check where it will validate all of your information. You can see in this case, I'm failing the form completion check. You'll need to have all of these statuses set to pass and select the box, obviously, that indicates that you're saying this is the correct information to go ahead and complete the certification. Once you complete the certification, the information gets shipped off to DRA, or excuse me, DOR. Then DOR will go through, do their review. At that point, you may have the forms returned to you if they want you to make a correction, or you will at some point have the forms approved as they go through and do their approval process. If your forms get returned to you, you'll get a notification that will tell you to log into the system. And on the form itself, you'll see, it won't show up here because I'm not looking at a returned form, but there'll be a box down below that will say, file or reviewers' comments or resubmission requirements, which will allow them to give you an area just to state, this is what we saw, can you correct this? And I think, usually Melissa and her group reach out ahead of time anyway, or send an email as well. There's a question coming through, what format do files need to be in that are uploaded? They need to be CSV files. Some vendors produce them as just straight text files, but they are comma separated internally. Your vendors have produced special files to be compliant with this. So if you have not talked with your vendor about this, we suggest you do. All the vendors have files. So Julie, I'm not sure what system you run, but the state has also been working with vendors to collect basic instructions from all of them on how to operate their reports for the state system. So we have about 5 minutes left. I want to make sure we have enough time in here for questions from everyone. So, I'm happy to take.
Oh, apparently he got booted out. That's unfortunate. So yeah, I wonder if it was, yeah, that's weird. We'll give him a few minutes to see if he'll get back online.
I'm right back. I'm here, sorry.
Oh,
I meant to
okay.
hit stop share in my meeting and I hit leave accidentally. So
okay, very good.
I was just saying, I wanted to make sure we had a few minutes here for questions in case anybody had them. I'm not seeing any questions. I'll give Chad another minute or so, but obviously you can always feel free to follow up with us afterwards or follow up with Wendy or Melissa or anyone over at the Department of Revenue.
Yes, Melissa, as I mentioned, is our main contact. Her phone number is 605-773-2136. Most of you probably have her email as well, but otherwise, Brianna is, you could always reach out to her as well, 773-2772. And yeah, just if you have questions, feel free to reach out to them. We will help you out. It's some days are a little bit slower going on the old turnaround time on getting questions answered, but we usually can churn and burn quite decently as long as we don't get stuck on something. But just be patient is what I'm saying, is that more than likely we are not ignoring you. It's just that we haven't got to you quite yet. But anyway, with that being said, I don't have anything further. And if there's no other real questions, and Dave is done, I think that we can cut you loose. And as I mentioned, there will be another training just like this here. I believe it's on November 1st. There will be also a couple of other trainings regarding some of the other e-file forms coming in the near future. I've sent those emails out, so hopefully you have those on your calendar and plan to attend.
And we will put this recording up so people can refer back to it as well.
Yes. And when he says put it up, it's on the help button on the e-file landing page.
Correct.
Okay. All righty.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you. Bye-bye.